Okay, I think we are live. So good morning, the people on this side of the oceans, and good evening, the people back home. Welcome to another, the second discussion in this series on suicide. And as we started last week, we'll observe a 30-second moment of silence for the people we've lost to suicide. So 30 seconds, even me, my happy self, 30 seconds for a moment of silence. Okay, I think roughly it's up. So last week we started the discussion and we catered to the women. And this week we are the discussion is gonna be centered around men. And just to go back to the statistics, 1 million people in the world, the ones we know, die by suicide. 60 to 80% of these people are men. And for every person who's died by suicide, 20 more people have attempted to die by suicide. And so this week we are going to have the discussion. Our panelists today are Peter Mbuga and Austin Thomas. The other name is very hard for non-lawyers, but it's Oguluta. And so we'll start the discussion this week, like last week. I just want to get the definition of suicide from you two. Last week, we even had a legal definition, imagine. So this week, let's start with the definition of suicide from you two, and then we'll go on from there. Austin, because I'm seeing you on my screen, we can start with you.
Thank you so much, Posa, and good evening to all who are joining us from Kenya, and good morning for the ones in the States. Confirm if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear
you. So of course, when it comes to the aspect of definitions of suicide, a lot of times you have to think about the different interpretations. Because sometimes you can have a legal definition and other times you can have a clinical practice definition. But basically, it's the act of intentionally ending one's life. So when you talk about suicide, it's the act of intentionally ending one's own life. However, from a practice point of view, there are certain behaviors that we normally refer as related to suicide. So hopefully as we go along in the discussion, we look at some of those behaviors for us to make a distinction between suicide and those other behaviors. Over to you, Posa.
Peter, do you want to add on to the definition, or that's adequate?
I think he has covered it all. Good evening, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this discussion. Last week, with I enjoyed the discussion last week, and I learned quite a lot in the process. So my own definition would be is when someone intentionally hurts themselves with the goal of ending their life, and they actually die because of it. Okay, so that's what I would call suicide. I mean, harming yourself intentionally with the goal of ending your life, and you actually succeed in ending your life.
Okay, and Peter, while I have you there, I know I've given the stats worldwide. What are you seeing? Mambo kwa ground VP, what are we seeing in Kenya? In terms of the street, what age groups are dying by suicide? Is it an urban, rural? What's the urban-rural difference? And because we are Kenyans and tribe is our business, is there a tribal distribution if we could understand also the tribal trends for suicide? if you have those statistics?
The unfortunate thing about our Kenyan situation is we don't have statistics. We don't have any statistics about suicide or generally even mental health. We don't have that. So anything that I would say would be just off the cuff from myself. But what I know for sure as a psychologist is that it affects people of all ages. There's nobody, there's nobody, just like mental health, mental illness, there's nobody who is immune to mental illness. So it can go across. The only thing I would say is, of course, lately, and of course, because they are in the public domain, we are learning about some celebrities losing their, taking their lives, according to the media. Though, of course, we never get any real confirmation, no official confirmation. So I would say if you check the range of those, it would be in the maybe 30s, around 30s. But globally, the statistics say that teenagers are the biggest, from 15 to 24 years are the most affected by, it's the topmost killer of people between the age of 15 and 24. Okay, followed closely by people between the age of 25 and 34, and then the rest come in from maybe 35 years to 65. Then, as I said, it's across the spectrum. The other issue about the statistics, especially locally, is there's so much stigma that it's actually not reported at all. Nobody wants to be reported to have a relative who has died from suicide and things like that. So we are in a lacuna. I don't know whether Austin has something to add on that.
Thank you. So usually the Ministry of Health carries out what they call the Health and Demographic Surveillance System. And periodically you would find a question in that surveillance, a question about if there are any family members who have died and if the cause of death is known. So that is one of the ways we kind of get verbal reports of suicide in families. The other aspect is that our autopsy rate in Kenya is not as high. Ideally, if everyone who died, we did an autopsy, then we'll be able to have a definite coding of the cause of death of that person. So of course, we have verbal reports of family members who have died by suicide. That's in the case of the verbal autopsy. And then of course, whenever there is a postmortem that is done, the pathologist also give like likely cause, or that this person who has died is likely to have died by suicide. So that's one aspect that makes us have a difficulty in terms of getting accurate statistics compared maybe to other African countries where you find there are certain countries where the autopsy rate is quite high and is part of the reason, is part of the documentation before someone is buried. Having said that, the reality also is that within our clinical settings, we have differences between those who attempt suicide and eventually die by suicide in terms of the gender differences. The females seem to have more attempts compared to males. However, when the males attempt, their success in terms of committing suicide is quite high. The other thing that I've also noticed is that in terms of the age segregation, amongst the males is that it increases with age. The risk increases with age. So it's like the older the male person who is having an imminent thought of suicide, the risk is quite high compared to the females. Then also the other thing I've also noticed is the diagnosis, the mental illness diagnosis. In my clinical experience, I've been doing counseling since 2003. And in 21 years, I've had five clients who actually committed suicide. So of course, I was able to look back at the types of diagnosis that the clients had in terms of the ones who have committed suicide and also those who have attempted. And there are certain correlations that we can be able to talk about in terms of the mental illness and the risk of suicide. Then, of course, also there's the other aspect of thinking about which methods did these clients use and did they consider the lethality of those methods. So on the ground, I think the biggest challenge is the aspect of statistics, where when someone has died, not all families are doing an autopsy and having that autopsy documented. Of course, the burial permit sometimes gives an indication, but that burial permit is not a scientific document that you can say now we are relying on it to get the statistics that this person actually died by this cause of death. So that's where we are at in terms of the statistics.
Okay, so back to the statistics, the Kenya Demographic Health Survey, the methodology is terrible, for lack of a better word.
Exactly,
It's the methodology. I think we need to do better. And then the second thing about because of this is me putting on my MD hat for 2 seconds, and I ditch it. The second, the aspect of stigma. I had a relative die by suicide last year. But even in the eulogy, it was written death due to diabetes complications. So I don't think on the ground we have true statistics because of the stigma associated with it. Okay, and because you've touched on it, on the methods used to die by suicide, when we compare with the women, I know I don't like trauma porn and suggesting methodology to people, but we need to talk about it. When we compare to the women, and because the women are attempting more, but the men are attempting less and dying and completing suicide. What are the difference in methodologies? We can start. Okay, Austin, you're on my screen. Or Peter, do you want to take a stab at it first?
Austin, give it a go.
So for me, for a lot of women I've seen, they would have poison as one of the methods. Drug overdose is also another of the methods that I've seen. For men, you have a lot of hanging. So you'll see someone hang themselves or someone cut themselves. So it's like, in terms of the consideration, it's like the men are using more lethal methods compared to females.
And in the US, because we are the US, of course we are using more guns to die by suicide. So it's more lethal, and they complete suicide rates in the US are more because of access to firearms. Peter, do you want to add on to that?
I agree with Doc. The cases I've personally been involved in, especially for older men, have been through hanging. And okay, I had a client who also tried to overdose, a male. A much younger client. I think the younger clients are using probably drug overdoses. But this particular one who did not, and he did not succeed in the overdose, also tried to obtain a gun as well to do it. though I don't think his intention was to shoot himself, but either maybe to, I don't know. I think he was trying to get himself killed by somebody rather than kill himself. So yeah, so that was it. The gun use locally has been, of course, to people who have access to guns, and mostly our disciplined forces. So those have used the guns.
Okay. And for
The methods.
sorry, just go
So,
ahead. Go ahead,
so
Austin.
other methods that we've also seen is like jumping from heights.
Yes.
So I've seen like for the flyover at South Sea or the flyover at Safaricom in Westlands. So there are people who are jumping from heights. Then we've also had those who are jumping onto the road. So it looks like a traffic accident, but it was actually a suicide attempt, throwing themselves onto cars. Then there are those who have choked themselves. So whether it's through the hanging or other methods of choking themselves. We've also had instances where people have cut themselves. So like one of my clients actually prepared a bath and they sat in the bathtub and they cut themselves. So by the time the family was realizing what was going on, the water had overflown and it was mixed with blood. And then, of course, when you look at these methods, you'll notice that certain methods maybe are more popular amongst men compared to females. Females, as I'd mentioned, the drug use is one of the methods quite common. For males, the hanging is quite common. Poisoning, a lot of times also for females is quite common. Same for like the traffic. Traffic is quite common with men. You find a man will throw themselves onto the highway and boom, they are gone. So those are some of the methods that I've experienced so far.
Would someone take a stab on Joanne's question? The murder-suicide rates in Kenya. Do we have what? Okay, because we have decided there are no statistics. What is the situation kwa ground VP?
Okay, no statistics, but generally, the research generally is that they are thankfully very rare, murder suicides, and for those men who commit such murders and of course then take their lives, they already have a history of violent behavior. Yeah, there's a history of violent behavior from them already. The other thing, according to research, of course not Kenyan, that financial downtowns, unemployment might be blamed for committing such murders and then taking one's life. But normally, it always has something to do with a history that person already has a history of violence. Yeah, it's not it doesn't come on its own that financial situations have gone down. They also found that the men who do such things are the possessive and jealous type of personality. And of course, then that's why when they call them crimes of passion and things like that. Yes, I don't know whether Dr. Austin, you have something to add on that?
I think if you look at the media reports in Kenya, it's every month you'll have newspaper reports of murder-suicide, whether it's with police officers, whether it's with the people in intimate partner relationships, whether it's with the mothers and children or the parents and children. So it's quite common, so to speak, in terms of the media reporting. And it becomes a question of how does this occur and why does it occur? A lot of times you find there is a homicide that has taken place first, and then then a suicide happens thereafter. In some cases, what has happened is that it could have happened in the same day. But other cases, we've also seen that the suicide occurs maybe a week later. And then when all the bodies are found, that's when you realize that there is actually a murder-suicide that has taken place. So it's something that we are experiencing in our country. And when it comes to the clinical setting, a lot of times we'll still treat it the same way as any other suicidal behavior, because we want to understand the individual, what is making them have the same behavior or the thoughts that is driving them to the suicide. So this is something that we currently experience in our setting. Quite common amongst law enforcement officers. If you've seen the newspaper reportings, is also quite common in relationships, intimate relationships or family level relationships. And of course, this also helps us to know what kind of interventions to design in our communities.
Okay.
Just to add on, I think where of course where guns are frequently used, as I said earlier, it would be with our disciplined forces people. Okay, the biggest reason is it's more efficient way of killing, yeah, and even also taking your own life, and it's and it can be used impulsively. You don't think twice. I mean, the thought comes, I have to kill you. You're moving around with this man or something like that, so you just point the gun and shoot. So that's why I guess in the disciplined forces, it's much easier. And also, a gun is easy to terrorize somebody with, especially if you are the jealous type. I mean, you're thinking, I mean, if you point a gun at me, I think you have already terrorized enough. So the move from terrorizing me to shooting me, I think is just a trigger away normally. So yeah, so I think that could be part of all that.
When we had the discussion about women last week, this didn't feature. So, and yet they are female disciplined forces. So is this more the murder-suicide using firearms? Is it more common in just male disciplined forces members, or it's across the gender?
My thoughts before I give it to Austin is that men don't get help on time. Okay, even for a serious illness, they go to get help when they have no other choice. So my thoughts are, these people have depression untreated, and so it's probably they're in a very severe state normally because they've never had it looked at all. I think that would be the difference between the ladies, because the ladies are more expressive. They report, yeah, I'm not feeling myself and things like that. But this guy is quiet and silent, and it's just building up. That's my thought.
Austin, do you have Austin, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Yes.
Okay. No, the same question. This didn't feature last week when we were talking about women, and yet we have both male and female disciplined forces members. Why are the male counterparts dying and committing murder-suicide more than their female counterparts? English, Elisha.
I think in my view, I think this is something, how would you say, interesting to study. In the sense that one, there are a number of variables that one would need to look into. For instance, you want to understand the individual officers' demographics. You want to understand their level of education and training. perhaps their disciplinary history, years of service, their gender, their marital status. And with this, then you can be able to also look at what are some of the stressors that the officers are experiencing that will then help us to understand the aspect of the murder-suicide. So of course, having said that, from the reports that we see either on media or even from some of the studies that have been carried out, you'll notice it's the gender differences are still there in terms of male versus female. The males seem to do it more compared to the females. But then we have to look at all the other surrounding, surrounding individual demographic variables for us to be able to understand why that is happening. So that's why I'm saying it's something interesting to study. Hopefully, maybe people in this call can be able to join in such a study.
If the discipline forces are accepted to be studied. I just want to comment from the medical side. So the individuals who attempt suicide and it doesn't, and the attempt doesn't get completed, right? Especially
Yes.
individuals who are consuming organophosphate poison. You know, all those chemical herbicides we use in Kenya, and then you
Yes.
get to swallow. My goodness, the aftermath is brutal. If it doesn't get completed, you either meet them in the ICU and they end up dying eventually because they'll need surgery because it's corroded you can imagine their swallowing pipe. Let me use swallowing pipe. The food tract is corroded. They need several surgeries. If they use the gun and the gun just got lodged, the bullet got lodged in their brains, and they end up just needing care and care, they'll end up dying, but it won't be recorded as dying by suicide. It will be complications of something else. So that is something we need to think about, and those statistics don't feature as stats for people who die by suicide. So let's go to the why are the men then attempting or dying by suicide? What are the features? What are the causes? And we can use it globally and of course qua ground. Why are men choosing to end their lives? Austin, you're on my screen.
Thank you so much. So of course, there are a number of, how would you say, risk factors that is predisposing men to either attempt suicide or even die by suicide. One of the risk factors that we look at is the history of self-harm. So of course, we may want to find out from the individual or even from the family member, does this person have a history of either intentional self-poisoning or intentional self-injury at any given time in their life? The other factor that we look at is the history of mental illness for those who have a mental illness. We also look at the history of substance use disorders. So were they using any drugs, alcohol, or other psychotropic substances? We also look at aspects of childhood stress and childhood adversity because we want to understand how was their home situation like. A lot of times we find in certain families from one generation to another, there has been history of suicidal behavior or even suicide itself. Then we also look at the aspect of age, gender, and marital status. In terms of age, we normally would look at, for the males, it rises with age. As the person grows older, sometimes we find there is a suicidal behavior. In terms of marital status, we've found either single males or widowed males sometimes have more attempts compared to those who are in marital relationships. So there's that aspect that we also look at. So those are some of the factors that kind of have experienced. One of the factors that sometimes is never discussed within Kenya is the aspect of personality disorders, because it is an aspect that is not easy to make a diagnosis of, because of the cultural interpretations and also the duration at which someone is interacting with a health professional. The other aspect that we also look at is the fact of previous hospitalization. If the individual had a history of self-harm, were they hospitalized because of it? And based on the hospitalization, what kind of interventions did they receive? So of course, those are some of the factors that we think about in terms of the risk factors. Other times also, we've had instances of hopelessness. We've also had instances of psychological pain, and the individual wants to escape from that psychological pain. So those are some of the factors that come to mind.
Peter, same question.
Yes, I can chip in. I think Doc has covered most of them. Of course, there are mental disorders which involve depression or some elements of dysphoria. Of course, meant if you suffer from major depression disorders, if you suffer from severe anxiety, if you have schizophrenia, if you have bipolar 2, mostly bipolar 2 has more of the depression element. So those people are definitely more predisposed to suicidal ideation and suicide itself. The other thing that I found myself is transitions in life are anything that can take you towards depression. For example, okay, one old man that was admitted at the mental hospital I worked in, had just gone through a retirement. He was actually just waiting for his final dues. And the only thing that saved him from hanging himself is, I think he must be very heavy. So the rope cut, otherwise he would have killed himself. So transitions like retirement can trigger depression, which leads to suicide. Divorce, separation, death of a loved one. I think we heard of a recent case where a guy, his mom died, and he jumped onto the road and twice. The first time he wasn't killed, so he jumped in again. He just lost his mother. So yeah. So transitions. I wanted to talk a little bit also about what Doc has talked about childhood trauma. We call them adverse childhood experiences. Okay, and that involves it could be physical, sexual, and emotional abuse that has happened to you before the age of 18. Okay, it could be emotional and physical neglect, or yeah, it could be living with a family member with a mental health problem, or substance use disorders, witnessing domestic violence. I've had adults who cut themselves, and when I dug a little bit on their history, they were in a, I mean, they grew up in a house where the mother was seriously abused by the dad. Okay, and I think that's when we are talking about psychological pain, and for a child, these are very painful things which you never grow to be able to sort them out. So they always hurt you. The other childhood trauma, and when we look at trauma, you know, trauma is a situation, we define it as a near-death experience. What could be a near-death experience for me? For a child, trauma is just they were neglected as children, yeah, or they were physically abused as children. For an adult, that might not look like life-threatening, but for a child, this is life-threatening. If you allow me, I'll just, okay, separation and divorce of parents, that is also traumatic to a child, or the death of one of their parents. A lot of the people I'm dealing with right now, immediately they tell me, my dad died when I was 5. I already start understanding why they're in therapy. I just want to tell you of one case, just to illustrate childhood trauma. There's this 25-year-old client who came to the mental health hospital I used to work in, and they said they'd gone to hospital, they had not been sleeping, and they'd been given sleep medication, but they couldn't go home with it because there was this voice in their head saying, you don't belong here, you don't belong here. And that told them that they'll just overdose on that whole medication. So it was just by grace that I think they thought they would come to the mental hospital, and I had them admitted. Now the story behind it is interesting in that when I dug this patient or this client, at the age of 1 year, the mother, who was newly married to this gentleman, got I think cancer, got a cancer. So you can imagine a newly married mother has gone into depression already, just the mention of cancer. Within the year, he had died from the cancer. So where did the mother end up? The mother went into serious depression. So what happened to this little boy or little girl? Yeah, I think that the thought starts at a very early age at this child. I don't belong here. You remember this thing they're talking about, and they're already 25, that I don't belong here. It comes from very far. It's not just from anything that is happening now. It's something that they were introduced to when the mother got into depression, was not available to them. They started feeling that this world, I don't belong here. So I think that is a sort of psychic wound that they have to live with most of their life. It takes them into depression at a very early age. And I think just to feel alive, they would start cutting themselves just to see whether they are alive themselves. That's my theory. I hope one day to test it, probably. But yeah, so that's how bad advanced childhood experiences, I think, can be. Yes. Yeah.
Joanne, because you're here and you know me, do you want, because this is your baby, the inner childhood, do you want to comment, or when impenzi mtazamaji? Joanne is used to this. Okay, you can crucify me later.
Leonie, I'm just listening. I want to learn today. I'm not going to comment. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And Austin, well, what I know you wanted to add something, but would any of you touch on parents dealing with just generally men and women dealing with chronic illness, chronic pain, and parents who are taking care of their children on the spectrum or with ADHD or with other chronic illnesses? What's your how are they handling that piece? Are they dying by suicide, especially when they can see there's no light at the end of the tunnel? I don't know. Mnaona hizo kwa ground, or is it only across the pond?
I think in generally, I would look at it on the source of hopelessness.
Okay.
So hopelessness is the factor in itself, but then different individuals have different sources of that hopelessness. For some, is about illness. They are taking care of someone with a chronic illness or taking care of someone with a terminal illness, and especially those conditions that are associated with pain or conditions that are associated with impairment, meaning that the individual is not functioning the way they would want to function. So we've seen that as an aspect. As the persons grow older, also we've seen aspects of low self-esteem. So maybe someone is looking back at their life, they are realizing that they had certain ambitions and goals, and time is not on their side. And so they start having these feelings of low self-esteem. We've also had instances where individuals had what we would call perfectionistic tendencies. So they really wanted things to be done according to a certain time frame with a certain standard, and they are not being done according to that standard. So of course, that then also has an impact in terms of their hopelessness. We've also had instances where maybe some of the clients have talked about relationship instability. Sometimes we hear of people talking about the duration of marriage, but then we don't talk about the stability of that marital system, because you'll find the marriage goes through different phases, especially now with parenting, and then children getting out of the home with retirement, sometimes getting chronic illnesses and managing finances and managing this new relationship. So you find that the relationship instability also plays an aspect. One thing that is also interesting is the aspect of social support. Again, lack of social support then becomes an issue. So all this, they kind of play into one another in order for us to be able to see what is causing the hopelessness. So that's why I think about what would be the source of the hopelessness for this individual.
And could any of you also touch a bit more on the substance abuse, especially because we Kenyans are known for our drinking behavior? I know, Austin, you touched on it a bit on it. Could you touch on our drinking behavior and our umsara behavior, that is weed behavior, and how it's contributing to suicide?
Indeed, for some, like intoxication in and of itself, because we've had suicidal attempts when an individual has been intoxicated. For others, we've also had suicidal attempts when they were withdrawing from substances. So I've had a few clients who were withdrawing from cocaine use or from heroin use, and the withdrawals were unpleasant to them, so to speak. We've also had those who have had extended use of certain drugs, sedatives especially, also has had an impact in terms of their suicidal attempt. So that's how I try to look at it in terms of the intoxication. We have those who are using multiple substances at the same time. Then we talk about the withdrawal aspect, and then the type of drug that the individual is using. So of course, amongst the clinicians or counselors, there are those who would think the substance abuse is the problem, whereas there are those of us who think that substance abuse is the symptom of the problem.
Peter,
I
Changia.
agree entirely with Doc. What actually, when I see a case of substances or alcohol abuse, I see a problem behind that. Yeah, it's either they're self-medicating for their psychological pain, or they are in certain stressful situations that they are unable to get out of. The unfortunate thing is, for example, alcohol is a depressant. So, okay, two things. You're already probably suffering depression from the things that you're dealing with. And then you go and add on alcohol, which takes you even lower in that ladder. Yeah, it takes you actually lower because you're not dealing with the basic issues. I had one lady at one point who always fought her husband, but that is when they go drinking, okay? Because it would take them to a worse situation of their depression generally. The other thing I wanted to say about that is, yes, the first thing we check in when you come for assessment, when you're dealing with abuse of substances, is we check you for depression first. At least I do, and anxiety, because and in most cases you'll find people who are seriously addicted or for especially alcohol have high depression as well. Okay. One thing that you had talked about, sorry, I mean, you raised this before, but I think I didn't have a chance to answer. It's about caregivers of people with mental illnesses, with the disability. Yeah, I had an opportunity last year in I think October to go to one of our informal settlements where there was this organization which was screening people with disabilities or children with disabilities in that area. And so they called me to give a talk about mental illness. And I think we had like 60 or 70 of them. And in the process of giving them that talk, I screened them all for depression. And I think 80% were showing clinical depression. Yeah. And the unfortunate thing is they'll never get help they'll never get counseling, they'll never get any form of help for the depression. And we know that they have it. So what happens, of course, is their quality of life is totally destroyed. So life gets worse for them with time. Yeah, so you never know. I mean, eventually, maybe they could be our victims of suicide.
Let's touch on the issue of masculinity. I know I understand some men take substances to not to show kujikaza kimwanaume, and we've been having all these talks of masculinity Saturday and Sunday, and how does all this fit into the whole story of the whole issue of either attempting suicide or dying by suicide? Peter, you're on my screen, so you start.
Yeah, masculinity means strength, yeah, and not showing weakness. And I think I mentioned earlier, even an ordinary illness, we will hardly ever go to hospital because otherwise we will look weak to the outside world. And I suspect it's not even Kenya. Maybe we could be worse off, but I think generally masculinity, because the world over, men go to hospital less than females. Okay, and it doesn't mean that men don't experience the same sort of illnesses that women do. So I think that now progresses into mental health. And remember, mental health has a stigma on it. So when you are not able to think straight, to deal with your issues, you go to numb those sort of feelings with substances, with alcohol, with probably even sex, yeah, which means that you're not even handling, and that's what I was saying, you're not handling the core issue. It's just simmering. So the day it explodes, something happens in your life, you lose your loved one or you lose your job, then your whole world crumbles, I think. I don't know whether that changias a bit on that, on your question.
Austin, you can take a stab at the masculinity issue.
Thank you. So one of the ways I look at it is in terms of the social expectations of men, or social expectations placed on men. And because of these social expectations, one result is that a lot of men are less likely to disclose or seek help when they have suicidal thoughts or behaviors compared to women. I remember one of my clients who died by suicide. When the person died and we were doing like a psychological autopsy, they were interacting with their friends. They would go and watch football every weekend. And they will be with people, but they are not disclosing or opening up to people in terms of seeking help compared to women. So you'll find a lot of women with their social interactions, they'll be able to share their challenges and seek help for their challenges compared to the men. The other aspect also has got to do with how men and women manage their relationships, especially relationship breakdown. So you'll find if a man is in a relationship and that relationship is really not working for them, it becomes a big factor for them to be suicidal compared to a woman. So those are the brief contributions that I have for this in terms of the masculinity aspect.
Okay. And so I know we've said all the doom stuff, but what protects us from what is protecting our men from dying by suicide? What is making you, Austin, not die by suicide or attempt suicide?
There are quite a number of things, I would say. One, I think, is the aspect of the socioeconomic status is also a protective factor. When someone has set a goal for themselves, they have stability in terms of meeting their socioeconomic goals. That's a protective factor. The other protective factor for men is the fact of being married. Marriage is a protective factor for many men. Then dealing with the family history. So in case there are any adversities that someone has gone through in their life, working towards dealing with those adversities, maybe seeking help for it, going for therapy has also become a protective factor. The other protective factor is when someone has a mental illness and they seek treatment, or not having a mental illness, meaning that they are improving on their own self-care. In terms of psychological protective factors, one of them is optimism. Having an attitude of optimism is a protective factor for many men, I have seen, and also having an attitude of gratitude, being grateful for what they've been able to achieve, being grateful for some of their own vulnerabilities and working towards improving themselves has also been a protective factor. Self-esteem, for me, I think that is also a big protective factor. Having a good or high self-esteem. Then relationship stability. So someone who has stable relationships also is a good protective factor. And that also includes the social support that they get, whether it's the social support in their neighborhoods, social support in their homes, social support in their clubs. So you'll find that those who will even join golf clubs or car clubs, because that also helps them to get the necessary social support. Then, of course, in relation to substance abuse, if someone is using alcohol, they're using it in moderation. But many times also they are not using other substances, so they're abstaining from the other substances. So those are some of the protective factors that I have come across that are really helping men to not commit suicide out there.
Peter, same question.
Wow, he seems to have said everything I could think of. And I guess those are the areas I'm in the positive psychology movement, and those are the things we teach, the things which give which gives us the strength before adversity comes. I mean, we're already strong, okay? And he mentioned, I think we have them under the term PERMA, PERMA, that in moderation that you are enjoying activities, positive activities, which give you joy, okay? Like exercises is one of them for sure. I think that he missed. Exercises. I've had clients with depression, and I've just followed up the daily exercises, and within a couple of weeks, the anxiety is gone and the depression is down. So exercises is a good antidote to depressive sort of thoughts. He mentioned gratitude. Gratitude is well studied in positive psychology, and it has positive effects. I mean, you feel happy when you're grateful. Okay. The other thing is you have an engaged life. Engaged in terms of that you're doing something that you love. Okay. So that helps. Then positive relationships, which he has mentioned. Okay? Not many friends you don't know, but just a few that are deep, that are that provide meaning for you. And then we talked about meaning in life, which is normally brought up by our spiritual life. Yeah, one of the advantages of having a spiritual life is that you have a higher sense of purpose. Okay, you have a higher sense of purpose. You have more peace. You're more hopeful. The hopelessness, I mean, it fights the hopelessness because it also gives you some meaning in life, that there's something more about life than just what is happening around you. And also it gives you better confidence, gives you better self-esteem, and even self-control. So your spirituality can be a protective factor as well. Yes.
And as Stan has asked, I know we don't conflict the two, but for now, let's conflict spirituality and religion. How can it be a risk factor?
A risk, religion can be okay. There are two kinds of spirituality. You can be religious and you can be spiritual. Religious mostly talks about belonging to one of the mainstream religions, following their creed and culture and all that, and living it there. Spirituality talks about a personal sort of responsibility, maybe even a conversion experience when you start having probably a relationship with the divine. Okay, so I think those are the main differences between spirituality and religiosity. But you can merge the two, and when you merge those two somehow, you will be able to have this higher sense of purpose, peace, hope, and meaning. Otherwise, religiosity can also just indoctrinate you into certain things rather than it being helpful. We've heard of the terrorists, the suicide bombers. I don't think they are spiritual. They're more of religious fanatics. I mean, they've been given this thought, they've been indoctrinated, and so they do. And also, of course, they are threatened. That there is this sense of being threatened. Your life is threatened by some religions as well, some religious practices.
Austin, do you want to add on to the religious factor? Or our
I wanted,
Yamsambwa is legit?
I think when you talk about religion, I think for some people it also gives them some form of identity. And having a strong sense of cultural identity then becomes an individualized protective factor. So that's how I would look at it. But then also in terms of the spirituality, there are certain spiritual principles that help in protection. So like when you talk about gratitude as one of those aspects, when you talk about optimism, when you talk about relationship with a higher power, all those then become protective factors. But then also we also I would want to add there's also the aspect of problem solving and coping. So if someone is able to have effective coping skills or effective problem solving skills, that also becomes a protective factor. The other aspect is when you ask an individual, what will be your reason for living? There are certain things that give you meaning in life. So then also that becomes a protective factor, the reason for living. There's also the aspect of connection. Are you connected to other people? Whether it is your partner, whether it is your family members or your friends, that also helps in reducing suicide risk. In terms of our community, do we have available, consistent and quality physical health care or even behavioral health care? We've talked about exercise. Exercise is actually very good, especially when someone engages in some form of intense exercises. That also helps in managing suicide risk. One of the things that I've also seen is the religious objections to suicide. I think for some people that has protected them from committing suicide. You know, like you're thinking that my culture or my religion or even my morality has objections to suicide. And because of that, then I cannot do it. It is not something that I would even think about, compared to maybe societies that even have access to assisted suicide, where maybe suicide is permissible. So I think in our context, even in the village, sometimes you'd hear in our culture, this is unacceptable. According to our religion, this is unacceptable. It is immoral to commit suicide. And that has also become like a protective factor from a societal point of view. I think on the aspect of law enforcement is about the reduced access to some of these methods has also become a protective factor. So whether it's about controlling the substances, whether it's about controlling the access to guns and all these kinds of things, also that becomes a protective factor.
Okay. Then let's move on to prevention before we, if this cure, we will cure. But let's prevent suicide, and we can do it at the individual, community, and the global level. Peter, let's start with you. What are we doing to prevent people with suicidal ideations moving on to dying by suicide? And you can, if you have an easy way of explaining what suicidal ideations are, we would welcome that too.
Yeah, okay, suicidal ideations are just the thoughts one gets that I can't live anymore. It's better to die. Those kinds of thoughts can come in. Okay, as we said, a lot of suicide and suicidal thought is mental disorder related. I would say 90% of suicidal thoughts and even completed suicides are mental disorder related. So awareness about that this could signal a mental disorder. Yeah, and that awareness, I guess, is part of what we are trying to do now. When you have persistent thoughts of death, then there's need to see a mental health professional. Okay, so awareness and also access to mental health professionals, I think, would avert the number of suicide. I mean, could help people with suicidal thoughts, which could end up with suicide at the end of the day. So that would be my first contribution to that.
And let's what in terms of protection, what are we doing to protect our men from dying by suicide, and that individual, community, and global level, or national, global? Yeah.
I'm not sure we're doing enough. I think that is key. Yeah, because as we said, we have a cultural masculine issue, which I don't think we've really addressed. But I think there is what do you call it? Okay, well, globally, one of the things that raises suicide rate is unemployment. Immediately, unemployment rate goes up, the suicides also go up. There's a good relationship to that. So, of course, the ability of men to earn their living is crucial. Yeah, because when you find that your bread and butter is you're not able to provide for that, and even for your family, then you can start having suicidal thoughts for sure. Okay, so unemployment needs to be addressed. The other thing and I think some countries have done that, because it's been realized that men rarely visit the hospital. Okay, so and when they do, it is something serious, and it could even be, which means that some of our physical symptoms could be symptomatic of even a mental illness. So the need to include screening of any man who comes to hospital, at least dig some background. What has happened to you? Has somebody died? Has you lost your job? So you see, those should trigger us to test men because then there's nowhere else. Nobody else is doing this. So that could be fitted into our system. Okay, so I think those are my contribution to that.
Austin's same question, and if you could touch on infrastructure too. This is what I mean by that. You know, like in Japan, because of the high suicide rates there, the buildings are made such that if you jump out, there's a net that will capture you. The San Francisco Bridge, where many Americans jump off to die by suicide, is being modified to have a net that will capture people who jump out by suicide, to try and die by suicide. And many buildings in America don't have windows or like a balcony that, you know, like when I think about my training in Kenyatta, I just lose breath, because the balconies are open. You're on 7th floor and you've been told a devastating diagnosis, you easily jump out. So I'm just, if you could also just touch on the infrastructure, if anything, if there's any engineer here, please listen to us. Yeah, but just go ahead. Sorry for the rambling.
Thank you. So I think one of the questions that sometimes I ask myself as a counseling psychologist is, if a client comes and they've expressed suicidal ideation, how do I prevent them from committing suicide? Of course, there are protocols that we kind of observe that helps us to manage. One is that we try to identify what are some of the risk factors based on these risk factors, we can be able now to know what kind of intervention to give out. We also look at the protective factors, those that we've just discussed a few minutes ago. We then do an assessment of the suicide itself. So what is the content of the ideation that the person has? Have they made a plan? What kind of behaviors have they put in place? Do they have a method? Do they have an intention of actually committing suicide? Based on this, then we're able to do like a risk level and then the intervention that is required. So in terms of this, you'll find I would be in touch maybe with a psychiatrist or even a social worker, and we come up with a form of a care plan that we're going to manage with the client. So we'll develop a care plan and we'll also develop a safety plan. The safety plan will include the client signing what you call a no suicide contract. So I've given out clients this type of contract, and in that contract, we've put contact details of specific health professionals or even facilities that they call in case they're feeling they cannot take it anymore. We also agree on information sharing because at times we find ourselves in a situation where family members may be asking, if you knew that this person was going through this, how come you never shared the information with us? Or if it's in a school institution or if it's even in a different kind of setting. So we agree with the client information sharing with others because here we also have to discuss about the limits of confidentiality and also the limits as enshrined in the Data Protection Act of 2019. Then also, we give them the crisis contact numbers. So you find there are a number of NGOs or associations here in Kenya, whether you talk about the Good Samaritans or the Befrienders of Kenya. We also have a national suicide helpline run by the Ministry of Health. So we're able to give those crisis contact numbers for the individual. Meanwhile, also for us, from the counseling point of view, or even from the psychiatrist, they have to do accurate record keeping as a way of just documenting everything. And at the same time, I come to an agreement about doing a checkup call with the client. So if it's every 2 days or every 3 days, but doing it in a timely way, having timely follow-ups, and also agreeing with the significant others of the client to do monitoring because risk is dynamic. And so we have to continuously do a risk assessment. We also do a lot of consultations with other team members. So I said we work with a psychiatrist, we work with social workers, the counseling psychologist, and all of us will be in touch in terms of the care plan for this individual. So that's maybe from a counseling point of view that we're able to do this type of intervention. Now, in terms of the other interventions, a lot of times you'll find the other interventions are related to building upon the protective factors. So you'll find within counseling, we are teaching the individual coping skills. We are also teaching them problem-solving skills. So sometimes I would do that with the individual. Other times I would send them to a support group, or I would send them to group therapy. And in the group therapy, they're going to learn these skills. The other one is about seeking support from significant others. So we ask them to help identify who are some of these significant others that are going to give them support. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be someone they have a close relationship with. We also help them to look at some of the community engagements that can also help them to build on their aspect of reducing the risk. We also encourage individuals to exercise. So whether it's running, whether it's going to the gym, but can they engage in some form of exercise, whether it's cycling, weightlifting, but can they engage in a consistent physical exercise as another way of preventing themselves from getting suicidal. Then we also ask them to participate in spiritual activities. And so by the time someone is leaving again, we make sure that they are not feeling overwhelmed by the many options that they have in terms of dealing with their suicidal behavior. So each case is treated on an individualized basis after agreeing on this care plan, and we continuously do a risk assessment.
So in the across the pond, there's something called QPR, question, persuade and refer. It's like CPR that's available. I did the training for free online. What do we have an equivalent in Kenya? And what are we teaching from kindergarten mpaka chuo kikuu? I was gonna do the song Downtown Namachizi. From kindergarten until chuo kikuu, what are we teaching them, the laymen, and on how to prevent suicide? Are we doing anything? And please mention my Eshinam when you leave village when you're talking about this. Are we doing anything to help our people help each other? Because doctors are on strike right now, and when doctors are on strike, almost everyone else is on strike. What are we doing to prevent, if you understand my question?
I think in my experience, I think a lot of times we've relied on the media, whether it's the national radio or whether it's the FM stations. A few times you'll find FM stations would invite mental health practitioners to provide health talks. A few times also we've had NGOs, for example, during the month like May or October, when we have certain mental health holidays, international holidays, they would go on media and they would give talks. So media becomes one of the main sources of information. We've also had trainings for media practitioners because they help to portray what suicide is to the rest of the society. And sometimes we've had incidences of, maybe we can call it irresponsible reporting. And now a lot of our media houses are actually quite sensitive in terms of depicting a person's death by suicide. We've also had to talk to them about identification of the significant others. You know, sometimes you can cover the face of a child, but you are letting the mother speak. And so everyone knows ule ni fulani tulikuwa tunamuongelesha. So we've had that kind of training for the media. Then within our professional associations, you'll also find the professional associations. We have county chapters, and those county chapters then are challenged to do health promotion within communities. We've had a number of NGOs that have gone to communities or counties outside of Nairobi and doing trainings on psychological first aid, doing trainings on scalable psychological interventions. So you'll hear of interventions like the Problem Management Plus, Self-Help Plus, and they're doing it in other counties. And lay people are being trained to provide psychological first aid to their community members. And with this, they are then able to refer to the relevant health professionals within their locality. I think on the other side also is the aspect of religion. Our religious leaders also have a role in the sense that they are helping the society to respect life, helping the society to also have like a theological position when it comes to the aspect of suicide. And then that theological position also becomes like a protective factor within our communities. Within the counties, we have the national policy, the National Suicide Prevention Policy, and this policy is then being translated to different counties. I like normally to say that within our counties, we are supposed to hold the county governments to account and ask them to take more responsibility in this aspect, because health is a devolved function, so to speak. So how many of these counties have then translated the suicide prevention as part of their plans? How many of these counties have provided a budget for mental health and a budget that is allocated maybe to suicide prevention specifically? So we ask even the citizens to hold the county governments to account, because if you look at the budgets of the counties and also the budgets of the national government, you'll be surprised that the percentage that goes to transport, ground transport, is more than what goes to suicide prevention and mental health and all these kinds of things. So you then ask yourself, what is the priority of our governments when you look at that aspect? I think at the Senate level, we had petitions that have been made in regard to suicide prevention. We've also had petitions in relation to mental health. And with these petitions, one of the things that comes out is that we have a public and also a professional obligation in regard to suicide prevention. And so us as citizens, we then have to hold our leaders to account so that this aspect is fully implemented. So those are some of the thoughts that I have. Usually I'm not in a political situation, but I think about it that as citizens, we have to think about what our laws say and whether those laws are actually being implemented by the duty bearers to implement those laws. Yeah.
And I thought I knew stuff. My God, Austin. Hey, okay. Peter, do you have anything to add? About
I don't think I have much to add, except that yes, what Doc has talked about is a good idea that everybody seems to have, including the government. But I think only either 2 counties have a budget for mental health. Yeah, they don't have. They don't have. They've never prioritized that. But probably with the petitions that we're talking about. We're also talking about our associations. I'm a member of an association. How do we move? We don't have funds to move even to our communities. I mean, it's all pro bono and all that. So people get sort of tired. One way in my thought system is one. I think awareness is very important. And it could start even with the parents, even before it goes to the school. If I'm aware as a parent that, hey, this child of mine is not normal, is not like the others, there's something wrong with them. I had a parent last year, or is it the year before, a few years back, who's basically beaten her child throughout school, and the child only had ADHD. Yeah, so she's a bad-mannered girl. She's not performing. So you can imagine the trauma that child has. So she's basically, I don't know. I mean, she's a patient of mine now, basically, after that ignorance on part of parents, on part of school, to identify that this is a neurodevelopmental disorder that could have been seen. So from my association, what we are doing is we are taking mental health to the workplace. For example, currently we are running a workplace well-being coach training, targeting people in the workspaces. So that in the workspaces, at least people start learning how to be more resilient. Having that sort of interventions, and hopefully that will translate to their families and their children as well. So that's one way we are trying to address that gap.
Okay. And I always say that for the people across the pond, because the dollar, the pound, the dirham is stronger than the shilling for a long time to come now, you can sponsor any of these. Austin just needs chicken and uji, and Peter just needs something, tea, and take them to your village, your school, and for them to just conduct a seminar, and we will do it only takes a spark to get the fire burning. Okay, let's if you have a question, by the way, please raise your hand, or a contribution to the discussion. Please raise your hand. We will allow you to speak. But Austin and Peter, I want us to end on hope. What hope? No, let's touch on the people left behind first. The people left behind by those who've died by suicide. How should they move on? What should we tell them? And then now you can give us a message of hope as the human race, because it's just dire out here.
Maybe
Peter, you're on
can
my
start.
screen. Oh, okay. Yeah, Peter, you are on my screen.
Okay, ma'am. But I think the issue of knowledge is power. Yeah. And I think we should take it upon ourselves to learn about mental health, to learn about, to recognize it. Because if we can recognize a mental disorder, then I think that's the first step. Yeah. So I would, and the other thing I would say, if we don't ignore or minimize, for example, suicidal thoughts. I have a young man who's, I think, was fighting for his life about a week ago after having overdose. And I think it could be ignorance, it could be minimizing. So let's not minimize things which, especially mental disorders, things that look out of the ordinary with our teens, with our children, with actually anybody in our families. But with that, you just take a step, you will get some help. Not everybody can afford mental health assistance, but a lot of us in the mental profession are doing a lot of pro bono work. We will not turn you away if you can't afford. I think it's rare you'll find any of us counselors turning you away and you can't afford it. We're already doing a lot of work on pro bono basis, and we will not turn you away. So step up and you'll get the help you need.
Austin,
I think one
please
of
touch
the
on the
things
ones who are
that,
left behind. Sorry, left behind,
yes.
and give us hope. Yeah.
So for the ones who are left behind, I think one of the interventions that we've found doing is forming of support groups, where we have friends and family members meeting to provide each other with support. A lot of times, there's loss, there's the grief process that the individuals will go through, and this grief process is actually difficult because of the pain, because of the shock, sometimes because of other challenging reasons. Especially, you may find that some survivors may be blaming themselves. Maybe it's a parent or a spouse or a friend. They may be blaming themselves for failing to predict this death, or even for failing to prevent it, or even for failing to have effectively intervened. So, like, for example, when I had 4 clients who have died in the history of me being a psychologist, died by suicide. There are times I would ask myself, could I have done this assessment? Could I have done this referral? Could they have received that prescription that would have prevented them from dying by suicide? So of course, there's always that aspect because of the mixed emotions. Family members will experience stigma. So you'll hear, if a girl is dating a boy and then the family of the boy hears, they'll say, oh, so you're dating that girl where their mother had died by suicide. So there's that aspect of stigma. So with this, normally you'll find there are those who start lacking some coping skills. So they start using substances to deal with the issue. Others will start using alcohol, and maybe they're not using alcohol before. Others will get depressed. And so for me, normally I would say that these are normal reactions to an abnormal situation. So these are normal reactions to an abnormal situation. And in my experience, I think one of the healers of this situation is time. Time contributes to healing. Even though the pain is sometimes unbearable, but then the individuals, survivors of suicide, I would say that time also helps in terms of their healing. Seeking assistance of the health professionals, as my colleague has talked about. Seek help. That's a message that we normally give, that seek help. There will always be a therapist who will be available for you. I may not be the one available, but I may be able to call someone who knows someone who can be able to make themselves available in the different counties. So that's how we sometimes deal with the aspect of suicide survivors.
Okay. If Austin and Peter, if there's something I didn't touch on, next week we talk about the teenagers. So we've not ignored them. So the teenagers and the young adults. If there's anything I didn't touch, please you can add. But any of the audience members, if you have a question, if you have a comment, please raise your hand. We will pick you. Otherwise, when they're done, we will go and eat, because yes, we have to eat. Okay. Peter, anything we needed to add?
I was just going to say that at least let us be our men's keeper. Yeah, we need to watch out for those who have lost their jobs and reach out to them. Those who are going through grief, they've lost a loved one. I was telling you earlier, my wife died 2 years ago from a traffic accident. And luckily, I mean, not luckily, yes, I had information that I needed grief therapy. I think that helped me too. So therapy is important, yeah, when you're going through grief. But let us suggest it to any of the men around us. If they've lost their jobs, if they've lost a spouse, if they are divorcing or divorced or separated, they need to know that you're there for them. Okay, be there for them. Don't neglect them. Okay, and then direct them to the correct places, assistance, because they would be struggling, and we know that it's not easy for them to admit that. Yeah, so let's be our men's keeper.
Okay, and please share how people can reach you. You can the number or the business, whatever, you can share it on the chat. Okay, Austin, tufungie ukurasa. Our usual closer is not here, but tufungie.
I think one of the words I would want to talk about is the English words. I think they say euphemisms. Verbalizing, so it's like watering down what someone is saying. So a lot of times whenever we talk about suicide in our societies, or even in healthcare settings, sometimes people will not talk about suicide or ask the other person if they're being suicidal in the exact sense of the word. So you'll be hearing euphemisms. And then a family member might say, you aren't going to do anything stupid, are you? As opposed to, are you going to hurt yourself? Are you going to try and kill yourself? You see? So you find there's that kind of euphemism. And a lot of times, if I'm doing an assessment and I've used a euphemism, the suicidal person can actually manipulate the conversation and say no. But the reality is, they'll be saying, no, I'm not doing anything stupid. I've given a lot of thought to this and I'm going to kill myself. So it's better to actually try and use the correct, how do you say, terminology instead of using euphemisms. It's quite common with the death. It's quite common in grief, where we use a lot of euphemisms and we are not able to communicate clearly and understand each other. I think this is one of is a difficult topic normally to talk about for family members. It's also a difficult topic for mental health professionals to talk about with their clients. But I believe it's something that we have to deal with. A lot of times we also have to think about the myths that are out there in the community. And some of these myths then get transmitted to our societies. So like, for example, when you work with survivors of suicide, so the family members who've been left behind by their loved ones, there are certain myths that still exist. And so as a society, we need to reflect on those myths. For example, a myth, someone who's going through or has experienced a suicidal crisis cannot help others. So you'll find helping others can actually be a form of healing in such a situation. We've also had myths like a person who dies or attempts suicide is actually selfish. So also this is also a myth. The reality is that sometimes people have experienced disruptions in their social connections. And so to assume that the person who's dying is selfish actually is not correct. Another myth that has been there is the one of a man who attempts or dies by suicide is weak. So of course, here we normally would respond by saying that if you have not walked in my shoe, you cannot know how many miles that I've gone through. So don't judge someone before you walk a mile in their shoes. The other one is that suicide loss or even starting a conversation about suicide can make someone actually think about suicide. The reality is that us as helpers, we have to ask someone specifically if they are going to commit suicide or if they are planning suicide. And so I think in our society, we may need to continuously educate our communities about some of these myths, because these myths sometimes become barriers for help, or sometimes they become barriers for referring people to seek help. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see hands, I don't see questions, so we're gonna end the recorded portion. I usually give it like 3 more minutes unrecorded for anyone who has a question that they don't want to make it to the interwebs. But because this is gonna be recorded, I'd like to thank you, Peter and Austin, for honoring us and coming and giving us a fantastic 1 hour, 43 minutes. Very good. For the audience, we've basically stayed at the same number, and we need to clap. There were men in the audience today. Men who joined us, because usually mostly females join this conversation. Asanteni sana. Yes, clap for all the men in the audience. As usual, we are terrible. We as the Authentic Dialogue are terrible at advertising ourselves because we just do this pro bono, and the panelists do it pro bono. But we have actually a YouTube channel and a Facebook page that has all these conversations, and you can find them there. And if there's a conversation you want had, it's you can look at the whole repertoire of all the conversations we've had, and you have panelists who can come here and do it off the cuff, because I'm very insistent on off the cuff conversations, because we're not doing academic PowerPoints. Please send them our way. So please send the topics. Please send panelists who can stand me, and my fake panelist, who's my brother, who's not here. But asanteni sana. And when you talk to Peter and Austin, please pay them because they do this for free and they are not asking for much. Tafadhali walipe. Asanteni, ichi nimekuona, karibu sana. So I'm gonna end the televised part, whatever, the broadcast part, and then you can ask questions. Otherwise, tukakule.